The most basic components of our site structure are now in place. Let's start filling in the details with some navigation, content, and more. On most websites, you can click the site logo in the upper left corner to get back to the home page. Right now, we only have one page on our site, but soon we'll have multiple pages that will need to link together. When a site visitor goes to another page, this will be the link that takes them home. I'll type it out first and then explain it. So I'm going to wrap our H1 and H2 elements in an anchor element. And we're just going to type a little attribute here. And then we'll go ahead and close it just like that. And then we'll indent these two lines here. Links are created with what are called anchor elements, or A tags. The A in these two tags, of course, stands for anchor. The anchor element gets its name because it can be used to anchor a URL to some text on a page. In this case, we're actually using the anchor to go to another page. Inside of the opening anchor tag, you'll notice the href attribute. This is short for Hyperlink Reference. Inside the quotes, I've stated that I want the destination to be our index.html file, which is the file that we're looking at right now. When we have other files to link, we'll use other destinations. Inside our header, we're going to create the navigation in the form of a list, which we'll style later. The first part is easy. We just have to add the nav element, which is short for navigation. So I'm just going to skip down here and add in our nav element. You can use this element to wrap any kind of website navigation that you put together. It doesn't have any special function inside the browser, and it doesn't add any buttons or other visual bits. It's simply a semantic statement that says, here's our navigation on the page. Inside of the nav element, we're going to create an unordered list of links, like this. The UL element is short for Unordered List. I say unordered because we could also create an ordered list with an OL tag. Until we add our own styling, this unordered list will look like a bulleted list, like you might create in a word processing program. An ordered list would look like a list of numbers instead of bullet points. An ordered list would look like a list of numbers instead of bullet points like in our unordered list. Now let's add some list items. I'm going to open up our UL element here, and then I'm going to type a list item element, and I'm going to type the word portfolio. Then I'm going to type another list item and type about, and then one last list item, which will say contact. Now, I've created 3 list item elements using these li tags. Then inside, I've added some text. Let's save our work and then switch over to our preview and refresh the page. As you can see, our headline elements at the top are now colored blue with an underline. This is the default styling for a hyperlink that's provided by the browser. Our navigation looks like a bulleted list. However, we need to add some links here in order for our site visitors to get around to different pages that we'll create later. Let's go ahead and add those links right now, though. So I'll switch back to my workspace, and in between my opening list item tag and the word portfolio, I'm going to type a hyperlink. And I'm going to link this to index.html because our portfolio is actually going to be on our home page or our index page. And I need to wrap portfolio in a closing anchor, just like that. Now with my about page, I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to choose a different destination. In this case, it will be about.html. And I'm just going to cut my closing anchor tag there and put it around about. Finally, I'm going to type contact.html for this final destination here. And I'm going to then close it. So there we go. We have 3 new links here. Again, the first page is our index page or our home page. And the other 2 pages are our about page and our contact page. These pages don't exist yet, but we'll create them once we're done with the HTML for our first page. Let's go ahead and save this, switch over to our preview, and refresh. And as you can see, we now have hyperlinks for each one of our pages. If you click on the links now, they'll probably give you some type of error. When a link doesn't work because the page or content doesn't exist, it's called a broken link, and we certainly don't want to launch our site with any broken links. We'll fix those later. Our navigation is finished, but now we need to create the structure for the image gallery. We'll do this with a similar technique that also uses an HTML list. Similar to our navigation area, we're now going to use another unordered list to build our gallery inside of our section element. So I'm going to scroll down here and delete this temporary paragraph that's inside of our section. And instead, I'm going to type an unordered list. And inside of that unordered list, I'm going to type a single list item. We'll create other list items, but it's easier to fill out this one first. We'll then copy it and make the necessary modifications because most of these will be the same with just a few small changes. Now, we need to pull in some images for our gallery. I'm actually going to pull in all the images that we'll need for the rest of this project. To download those images, simply download the project files that are associated with this video. You should find a link to them next to the video player. Once you've downloaded them and unzipped the file, you should have a folder that looks similar to this one. Inside, you'll find all the images that we'll need for this project. To add these to your workspace, simply drag the folder onto your workspace and drop it in the area that's darkened that says Drop Files to Upload. Once I drop it in there, the folder and all of its files will be automatically uploaded and imported into our workspace. For the gallery images, you should feel encouraged to use your own pictures. You can of course use these, but if you want to customize the site, you could use your own artwork or your own photographs. This project works best with images that are sized to a width of 1024 pixels and a height of 768 pixels, or more commonly, 1024 by 768. We won't go into detail here about how to resize images, but most image editing programs like Photoshop can do this very easily. With our images in place, let's use them in our layout, like this. I'm going to go to this list item, and open it up. And inside, I'm going to type a tag called img with an attribute called src. Inside of that attribute, I'm going to type the value image/numbers-01.jpg. I'm going to type a second attribute called alt, and then I'm going to leave it blank for right now. Here we've introduced the image element, or img for short. Similar to some other elements we've learned about, it's self-closing, so you don't need to create a closing tag. The image element has two required attributes. The first is the source, or src for short. This is very similar to the href, or hyperlink reference, that we learned about for anchor elements. It simply tells the browser where this image file is located. In our case, it's inside of the image folder, and then we want to use the file numbers-01.jpg. This is what's called a relative path. In other words, we're telling the browser where this image is located relative to our index.html file. The image folder and the index.html file are sitting at the same level in our directory structure, or our file tree. Then inside of our image folder, we have our image. This is different than an absolute URL. For example, we could type http:// the domain of our website, which might be example.com, for example, and then the path to our image. However, instead of an absolute URL, we're just going to use a relative URL in this particular case. That will make it easier to upload our site to a web server later on. If that doesn't make sense to you right now, don't worry. We'll be using more examples of relative URLs throughout this project. The second required attribute is the alt attribute, which is short for alternate. This is intended to provide a brief description of the visual for when the image isn't available for some reason. This might be because the site visitor is actually a search engine spider, which can't actually see visual images. It also could be because the site visitor has images disabled in their browser. Yet another reason is to assist site visitors with visual impairments that use special software called a screen reader, which reads text out loud to help them navigate the web. In our case, we've left the alt attribute blank because in just a moment we're going to add a caption to our image just below it. When you add a caption, having the same text repeated in the alt attribute is typically not necessary. Let's save and then refresh our preview quickly to see what this looks like. As you can see, we now have an image on the page, and it's very large, but that's because we haven't applied any visual styling yet. We'll do that later on to help resize the image. Let's finish up this list item and add the rest of them. I'm going to add a caption just below this image using the paragraph element. So I'm going to open up a paragraph, and I'm going to say experimentation with color and texture to describe this image. Now, like I said, we're going to resize these images later on, but we'd still like site visitors to be able to click and see the full-size image. Let's add a link around this image and caption to the full-size image, and we can do that like this. So just inside of our list item and just before our image, I'm going to add an anchor element with the hyperlink reference image/numbers-01.jpg. You'll notice that this is the exact same file path as the source for our image. That's because in this case, we're linking to the image directly. Now we need to put our closing anchor just after our paragraph. And then finally, we need to indent these two lines. Now, up until this point, we've been indenting lines one at a time. But if you need to indent multiple lines, there's actually a shortcut key just for that. We can highlight the lines that we want to indent, and then if you're on a Mac, press Command and then square bracket. And if you're on Windows, you can press Control and square bracket. Now, of course, there are two square brackets, so depending on which one you press, will determine which way the text is indented. So on my Mac, by pressing Command and right square bracket or closing square bracket, it will indent the text. That's very handy if you need to indent lots of lines. Now, that's all the markup that we'll need for each item in our image gallery. Now, we just need to copy and paste this several times to add the rest of our images. Once we've copied and pasted each one, we'll modify each one so that it links to a new image. So let's do that now. First, I'm going to highlight this entire list item, being careful not to highlight any other code that I won't need. And on my Mac, I'm going to press Command-C. And if you're on Windows, you can hit Control-C to copy it to your clipboard. And I need this 4 times for a total of 5. So I'm going to hit Enter a bunch of times just to make some space to work so you can clearly see what's going on. And then I'm going to paste the contents of my clipboard by hitting Command-V. If you're on Windows, you can hit Control-V. So I'm going to paste it once, and you'll notice that I've actually copied some indentation here. So let's see if I can recopy that and then paste it again so that it only copies the code and not the extra indentation. I need to copy it 3, 4, and a total of 5. So we actually just copied that 4 times for a total of 5 list items. I'm going to delete this extra space because we won't need it. And now we're ready to modify each list item. So if we open our images folder, you'll notice that these are non-sequential. We go from 1, 2, and then skip to 6, 9, and 12. However, that's completely intentional. When you're making a portfolio, it's always best to edit it and only leave in your best work. So there are other things that I've created here, but these are the ones that I want to show. So we need to modify each list item. So we'll modify the href, and we'll also modify the source so that they match. So there's the second image. The third image is going to be 6 in this case. The fourth image will be 9. And then our final image will say 12. Next, we need to change each one of our captions. Otherwise, they'll all be the same, which is pretty boring and inaccurate. So our second image, I'll say, playing with blending modes in Photoshop. And of course, you'll want to type descriptions that match your own images. My second image, I'll say, trying to create an 80s style of glows. In my next image, I'll say, drips created using Photoshop brushes. And then finally, my last caption will say, creating shapes using repetition. Let's go ahead and save this. And then we'll open up our preview and refresh the page. And if we scroll down, you'll now see that all of our images are present. And below them, there's also a caption for each image. Now, if I go ahead and click on any one of these images, it will show me the link to the image, or the actual image itself, I should say, in a new page. If I click the back button, I can go back to the website that I'm creating. We're just about finished with the structure, but there's a few more things that we need to do to wrap this up. Let's wrap up this portion of the project by building out the footer. We already have our copyright in place, but we should add some social links and icons so that people can connect with us from any page on the site. First, let's add in the social icons for Twitter and Facebook. If you don't have a Twitter account or a Facebook account, or either one, don't worry. You can go ahead and link to whatever site you'd like, or you don't have to link to any site at all. If you do choose to link to another website or another social network, just be sure to replace the imagery with the appropriate logo for that social network or for that site. The iconography we need for Twitter and Facebook are included with the project files for this video, so if you haven't already downloaded the images folder like we did in the previous video, be sure to do that now and include them in the project, simply by dragging them onto the file tree here. Now, let's go ahead and scroll down to our footer, and inside of this footer, I'm going to type image, src for source, and then I'm going to type the relative path to our Twitter wrap ping image here, or PNG. So I'm going to type twitter-wrap.png, and I need to go back to the beginning here to make sure that I include the image folder there, because it's inside of the images folder. So just typing Twitter wrap won't work. You need the images folder. And then I'm going to type an alt attribute. And in this case, we're not going to add captions to these images, so we do need to add an alt attribute. So the alt attribute I'm going to type is just going to say Twitter logo, because that's what this picture is. Now, to save some time, I'm going to copy this line and paste it, because we just need to change Twitter to say Facebook, and then we just need to change the alt attribute to also say Facebook. Again, you could find alternative icons that you like better, provided you have the permission from the owner to use them. Now, let's link these to our Twitter and Facebook profiles. I'm going to type in the links to my personal Twitter and Facebook here, but you should type in the links to your own profile. So at the beginning of this line, I'm going to type an anchor element with the href http://twitter.com/nickrp, which is my username on Twitter. Then I'm going to close this, and I'm just going to take this closing anchor tag and put it at the end of this line. So we have an opening anchor, the image for Twitter, and then a closing anchor. So this will create a picture that links to my Twitter profile. Now we need to do the same thing for Facebook. So I'm just going to copy that line and paste it here. We need to change twitter.com to facebook.com. And my username on Facebook is different than my Twitter handle. So I'm going to type Nick Pettit. And then at the end of this line, which you'll notice has actually wrapped to the next line, I'm going to close my anchor element. If you don't want To wrap to the next line like this, you can go up to the View menu and uncheck Word Wrap. And that will leave your lines as is, but it will add in a scroll bar down at the bottom so that you can see what's at the end of the line. I actually prefer to keep Word Wrap on so that I can see all of my code at once without having to scroll horizontally. So again, even though this looks like it's on a new line, it's actually all one line. And you can see that if you look at the line numbering over here on the left-hand side. Now let's save the page, go to our preview, and refresh. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you can see the logos for Twitter and Facebook, and if I click them, it will bring up my Twitter profile. Now there is one more very important thing that I'd like to point out before we wrap up. We've used two different types of links on this page now. Notice how the links in the images are relative links, like we discussed previously. But over here, we have the full web address, which is an absolute link. A relative link describes the location of a file relative to the current file. So again, index is relative to the image folder. They're sitting at the same level in the directory structure, and you can see that because they're aligned with one another, just like so. And then inside of the image folder is our image Twitter wrap and Facebook wrap. If you can't see all of the file name, you can go ahead and adjust the size of the gutter here, or the size of the file tree, relative to the size of the text editing area. As a general rule, you want to use relative links whenever possible, because this will make your website more portable. What I mean by that is when we take our entire directory structure and put it somewhere else, all of these relative links will still work with this index file because they're in the same directory together. If I were to type out the full domain name here, so we could say example.com/image/ the name of the file, and if we did that and then we tried to put this website on another domain, such as example2 or something like that, then all of our images would break because it's not the same path anymore. So you want to keep these relative. However, because we're linking to an external website, such as Twitter and Facebook in this particular case, we do need to use absolute links. So to remember this rule, just think you need to use relative links whenever you can, and only use absolute links when you absolutely have to. We added a ton more markup to our page. It can take a long time to memorize HTML elements and CSS properties, and even the best web designers look things up using a search engine all the time. Don't worry if you're having trouble taking in everything we're covering. What will help more than anything else is lots of practice. So let's pause for a code challenge and code some more with the elements that we just learned about. We've created most of the content for our home page, and we're almost ready to get started on styling. First, we need to learn how to create separate CSS and HTML files and then connect them together. First, let's organize our code by creating a new folder called CSS. To do that, just right-click in the file tree area here, anywhere where there's blank space, and select New Folder. Then, in lowercase, type CSS and hit Enter. Now, inside of that folder, we want to add a file called Normalized.css. you can download this file from the project files associated with this video next to the video player. Once you've downloaded the project files, simply unzip them and then select the normalized.css file and drag it into the file tree area in the darkened space that says Drop Files to Upload. Now, you can move Normalized CSS into the CSS folder. So I'm going to drag normalized.css into the CSS folder, close my images folder there, and you can see normalized.css is now inside of our CSS folder. Now, I've already opened up normalized.css, but if you haven't already done so, just go ahead and click on normalized.css in the file tree, and it will open up in the text editing area. Now, for the first time, we have two files open here. So you can see that our text editing area actually has tabs, just like a web browser. We can click on one of these tabs and drag it to rearrange our tabs. This won't have any effect on the way our files are organized in the file tree, but if you want to rearrange the tabs just to stay a little bit more organized, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to close a tab, just go ahead and hit the X. But let's go ahead and take a look at normalized.css. If I take the scroll bar here and scroll down, you'll notice that it's a pretty long file with lots of code. This is a special CSS file that will reset the default browser styles. In other words, every browser applies their own default styling so that headlines are larger than paragraphs, bulleted lists have bullets, and so on. There are some other inconsistencies between these default styles from one browser to another. So before we add our own styling, we want to use normalized.css to basically level out the playing field. Now, we've included this file into our project in the file tree, but that doesn't mean it's included in our HTML. We need to include it into our HTML file here so that it knows this file exists, just like we included our images previously. So let's look at index.html and focus in on the head area, which again is different than the header. So don't get confused there. Now, just below our title, I'm going to use what's called a link element. This is different than an anchor element and actually does not link to another page like you might expect. It actually just links to other files so that our web page knows they exist. So I'm going to type an attribute inside of my link element here, and I'm going to give it the value Stylesheet. So the attribute is rel Stylesheet. And then, similar to an anchor tag, we're going to use the href attribute, and we're going to type the relative file path css/normalize.css. And then we'll go ahead and close our link element. I want to go over relative file paths one more time very quickly because it is so important. This href file path here is referencing the CSS folder relative to the index.html. And then inside of it is normalized.css. You can see that normalized.css is inside of the CSS folder because it's slightly indented, whereas index.html is not as indented, so you know that it sits at the same level as these other folders, and it's not inside of a folder. Now, similar to other elements that we've seen previously, this link element is self-closing. and it has rel or relationship attribute, which describes the relationship between the current document and the linked document. In this case, the linked document is a style sheet that's going to add some style to our HTML. Next is the Hyperlink Reference attribute, which you'll recognize from the anchor element, like I said previously. We've dug into the CSS directory, and then we've selected our normalized.css file. Now, let's go ahead and save and open up our preview. And as you can see, there haven't really been any dramatic changes just yet. A few things are spaced slightly differently, and the font may look slightly different, but that's about it. You'll also notice that there's no bullet points on our unordered list anymore. This CSS reset will lay the foundation for our own custom CSS, which we'll add on top. We'll get into custom CSS very soon.